Hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for how to run great virtual events. As you may already know, hosting events has always been a great way to fuel your business. Events allow you the opportunity to connect with your prospects and customers, build relationships, and even create enthusiasm for your business, your organization, and your products and services. Now, due to the current state of affairs, you may find yourself moving online to run your very first virtual event. And since this is your first time, you may actually be feeling a little bit nervous about it, which is completely understandable. But let me assure you, once you know what to expect, know how to prepare, and you really have some tips to get you going, you too can run a really great virtual event. And that's today why we're here. And we're grateful to have you join us with our expert panel. And we're going to be discussing the following topics to help you with your next virtual event. Today, we're going to be covering how to prepare for your virtual event. We're also going to talk about how to run your virtual event and keep people engaged along the way. And then we're going to talk about how to follow up after your event. So those are the areas we're going to be covering today. We're excited to have you here, and we're excited to have this group of panelists with us here today. And let me start by introducing myself. So my name is Dave Charest. I'm the Director of Content Marketing. Hello. Director of Content Marketing here at Constant Contact, and I am joined by Stephanie French. Hello, Stephanie. I think we're going to have people popping up on the screen. Hi, Steph. Thanks for being with us here today. We also have Jenna Schaefer, who's our programs marketing manager. Jenna, hello. So good to see you here today. And then we also have Mr. Matt Montoya, who is our channel enablement and marketing manager as well. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here today. I am going to stop sharing my screen. So now that you should be seeing us alone. So thank you everybody so much for being here. Really appreciate you guys taking some time and sharing your expertise with everybody here on the line here today. One of the things before we get started, I just wanted to mention to everyone that a couple of weeks ago, we actually did do a webinar on using Constant Contact to help manage the events that you're going to run. And so I wanted to have somebody actually share that link out to everybody in case you missed that, didn't happen to see it, and want to check out that information. So I think Rachel behind the scenes is going to share that out to everybody in the questions window. And let's see. What else here do we want to do? So we were sharing that. We've got a link to that. So we're going to chat here today. Here's the plan for today. We're going to chat for about 20 minutes or so, and then we're going to use the rest of that time to answer your questions. And to kick us off, I'd love to hear, actually, let's test this questions window if we can and give our presenters here a little bit of a background. Give us a shout out. Let us know what types of events that you have coming up that you're planning to run. So if you wouldn't mind dropping in some of that in the questions window, we'd love to hear about what you have planned. I'm going to pop out my questions window here so I can see those. All right. So if you have an event planned up, what type of member programs we have? See, thank you, Lauren. Appreciate for that. Outdoor recreation on the lakes, Carrie. Thank you so much. Virtual arts and crafts market, a happy hour, yoga, bingo, and trivia. This is great stuff, right? So we're at this period in time where everybody is kind of moving these things that would typically probably happen in a real, face-to-face scenario, that people are now moving to an online place. Yoga workshops, virtual river cruise night, amazing. Physician webinars, a virtual conference, an online theater festival. I love all of these things coming up here. Awards ceremony, excellent. Thank you guys so much for sharing that panel discussion. Great. So thank you guys so much for sharing some of these things that you're doing with us. I really appreciate this. And this will help us kind of frame some of the things that we talk about here today. So, when you're thinking about getting together, obviously one of the first things that we're going to talk about here is really it's preparing for this idea of running this event. And for me, one of the things that we really start to think about is what is the type of event that you're going to run, so that helps you decide kind of what that format is going to be. Are you going to do a presentation or a panel? Is it going to be a live class? Many of the things that we've heard here today. And then that helps you understand one, the types of things that you're going to need, but also how much time that you're going to have as well, and start thinking about that. Guys, I want to throw that question out to you. Like, what's one of the very first things that you want to think about when you're planning your event? Maybe we start with Matt.
Well, I mean, this goes into some real basics, and in fact, we're sharing an example of that literally with this webinar, which is you want to think about the lives of who your audience is. When are they going to be available? I know that seems pretty redundant, but you really need to think about, okay, if I'm trying to reach a lot of parents, well, especially in this day and age with at-home learning, you know, are you going to interfere with that schedule? Is your potential audience more available at night, on the weekends? So try to tailor your event to fit the needs of the audience you're trying to reach. And I said that we're doing that now. Well, we're talking to a national, somewhat international audience right now. And so the reason we're having it at this time of day is to try to make it available to as much of the country as we can. So you want to think through your audience.
Very good. Jenna, how about you?
Definitely think about your promotional schedule, right? So you want to make sure that you allow enough time for people to know about your webinar, register for the webinar, put it on their calendars, make sure that there's nothing else going on in their life so they can dedicate time to attending the webinar or whatever type of event that you're doing. And typically, I think we're going to talk about this a little bit later, get more into the promotional side of it. So I don't want to get too deep into it. We'll talk about that in just a few minutes, but I think it's really important to, I would say at least 6 to 8 weeks ahead of time, if you have that amount of time to really successfully promote it. At the bare minimum, about a month, I would say. But you know, sometimes we're not given that amount of time. I totally get that. So work with what you can, but at least sit down and come up with some sort of schedule.
And Steph, how about you? What information do you have for people thinking about getting planning? What are the first things they should be thinking about?
Yeah, so ditto on everything that everybody else said here, Matt and Jenna and you, Dave. But sit down and think about the information that you want to collect, because you're going to have a registration form, or you should, where you're collecting information. Maybe that's information that can be used later to follow up with people via email, also communicate with them via or for the event. But also, if you notice when you registered for this webinar or this panel today, we had a question in there, which is, what did you want to learn for this webinar? What do you want to learn about virtual events? And that can certainly help you to make sure that you're creating an event that's going to be going to provide value to people.
Yeah, very great tips there, and good things to really think about. So for some of you, it's really important to think about, you know, once you get going and you're starting the planning and thinking about what is the content going to be for that particular event that you're running, because determining, you know, if we're doing a virtual cruise tour, right, that we were talking about here, that's obviously going to be a lot different than a doctor doing some health webinars, right? And so you really need to start thinking about what that is, and, you know, understanding how you're going to be presenting. So are you going to be using slides to support what you're saying in the background, or are you going to just be on camera like you are here today, or do you actually have to film something else that other people are going to see? And so you really want to think about that experience for the people that are actually going to be on the other end of your event. What suggestions, I'm going to throw it out to you guys. Jenna, maybe, you know, share some suggestions on what you might have in terms of thinking about planning out the content for an event.
Yeah, so excuse me, I think coming up with learning objectives is one of the first steps that you need to think about. So I always ask myself, what do I want the people who are attending my event to either walk away being able to do or know? And I base my content solely around those learning objectives. I think we can fall into a habit of including information that's like, oh, I think this would be good to know, but it's not lending itself to the learning objectives. Get rid of that stuff. It helps you stay really focused. It helps you calibrate your time and how much you're going to talk about certain topics within the event, or, you know, what you'll be able to do. And it gives your audience a sense of whether it was successful for them or not. Did they walk away actually learning what they need to know or understanding what they need to do?
Yeah, I think you bring up a really interesting point that people should really consider, is that idea of thinking about stripping away the things that don't necessarily need to be there, right? And that is really helpful when you're thinking about those learning objectives. And I know, Steph, you talk a lot about outlining. Maybe tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so when I start creating, well, here at Constant Contact, we do webinars, of course, but I like to sit down and outline it. So thinking about the objectives, thinking about the type of event, if it's more of a panel or I'm interviewing something, maybe I want to outline or at least think about some high-level questions that I want to make sure I hit during that conversation. And that'll allow me to look at it objectively so that I can see, are we going to be able to help people reach those objectives and learn what we want them to learn or walk away with the value from the event.
Mm. So we're talking about, the people or the people actually showing up to that. I know, Matt, one of the things that you're always talking about is really this idea of audience. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that and
Sure.
how that figures into all of this?
Yeah, so this fits into what Steph and Jenna said, which is you want to make sure that you're tailoring your content to your audience. You want to think about who I'm trying to attract, who I'm trying to engage, and make sure that you construct content that is going to be attractive to them and is going to be relevant to them. So one example I see all the time is where an organization will do a presentation, a virtual presentation, to both, let's just say, clients and customers. Well, those needs, those wants are different, right? A lead is going to have a different perspective to what you're trying to do than somebody that's already bought from you. So you want to, if possible, dependent on your schedule, dependent on your budget, dependent on the tools you're using, and I respect all that, you may want to do multiple presentations tailored to each audience. That way you're going to have content that's relatable to them, but you'll likely attract them to register at a higher rate than you would have if you try to do an all-in-one presentation or virtual event.
Yeah. Another thing I wanted to add that I think is really important when we're thinking about the content, is are you going to be using slides? And I think one of the traps that a lot of people fall into, particularly when you're first getting started, is you want to put a lot of information on those slides. And really a big thing to really think about is when you're doing that is what you want to do is use those slides to assist you. Like have those be a backdrop to what it is that you're saying, and you don't want to be reading off a slide necessarily. So you really want to limit the text, use that as a supportive element as to what it is that the point that you're trying to get across, and try not to pack too much information on those slides if possible, because it can be distracting. And a lot of times if you have a lot of information on those slides, what people are going to be doing is they're going to be reading your slide versus listening to you. And some people may disagree with this, but one tip that I've actually found helpful is if I have a slide and I have some text on there, I'm actually going to have as little text as I can have as possible, but I'm actually going to say what's on the slide as text, because then I'm actually having people, I'm not reading the slide necessarily, but I'm saying the things that are there so people aren't distracted or not following along with what I'm saying, like I'm not losing them. So that's how I try to use text if I'm going to do that. So that's also something that to keep in mind. I see a lot of questions already coming in about technology and things to think about there. I was wondering if you guys wanted to share some insights there in terms of just thinking about the technology.
Yeah, I'll go first. I mean, really think about the size of your event. How many people do you think are going to actually register, but then also how many people are going to attend? And give yourself enough room, especially if this is your first event, because you may not know what's going to happen. So you also want to think about other technology that you might want to use during your presentation. Maybe it's a webcam like we've got going on today. Do you want to share slides along with your webcams? Do you need to have more of a collaborative event where your attendees need to be able to speak with you and also with each other? Also, I like things like thinking about, can you record? We get questions all the time. People are asking, are you going to be sending out the recording? And, that's so important because especially with this whole situation with COVID, things happen at the last minute. Maybe your kid needs to be taken care of or have lunch or needs something right away, right? So also some engagement tools like polls, which we'll talk a little bit more about later.
Excellent.
And to Steph's point,
yeah.
it falls into also what gear you have. So first thing you'd want to do is, as you're evaluating what tool you might use to have a virtual event, look at the requirements that those tools require, because you'll want to do an inventory of what you have versus what those tools will need. An example that would be a mic. I've been on plenty of virtual events where the presenter is talking through the computer's mic. That may be okay for a quick Zoom meeting around the office, but if you're doing something to potentially customers or clients or leads, you certainly want to be as professional as possible. And that doesn't mean you have to go out and spend a lot of money on a really high-end mic, but a decent budget, $50 can get you a really decent mic. And mics come in different flavors and fashions. Some are boom mics, some are tabletop mics, some are mics integrated into the camera. It's really dependent on your budget. If you're going to do something that doesn't have webcam involved, like we're doing now, then you really want to pay attention to your mic, because if you're selling somebody and all they can do is hear your voice, then your voice is literally all you have that's supporting the sale. So the mic is dependent on carrying your personality through to the presentation. So you want to weigh all these things out. Other things you want to think about is, can your computer handle the requirements of the tool you're using? Is your router up to date? Is your Wi-Fi up to date? You definitely want to think through all of these pieces, because they all will have an effect on your presentation.
Yeah, very good. Jenna, what else should people be thinking about when it comes to that?
Yeah, I think people really underestimate the importance of your working environment too. So a couple of years ago, I lived in a tiny 400 square foot apartment in Chicago, and I did not have room for 3 different screens. And so that didn't lend itself for me to have some sort of platform that I had all these pop-ups and systems running, that I could see my slides over here and my questions over here. And so I just had my tiny computer screen. And so it was important to me that I had a platform that was somewhat simplistic, and kept it really simple for me to be able to view and to manage on one laptop screen. Now I'm in a larger environment that would allow me to maybe have more of a complex system, or with more of the bells and whistles. But think about your working environment and what's going to be easy for you to manage, being able to answer questions or demonstrate, or be able to do some sort of workshop, right? What do those camera angles look like? So think about your working environment and what's comfortable for you.
Yeah, and I think another thing to throw out there to people, particularly if you're starting to run your first event and this is something new to you, is especially during these times that are happening right now, like we're obviously all remote, we're working from home. I'm working on a single computer screen today, as I think many of us are, and so I think people remember that I think this time people are going to be a bit more forgiving on some of the things that you're doing, that you don't need to invest tons of money in things off the bat. I mean, as simple as Matt was saying, a simple headphone and making sure light is coming at you from the front. Some simple things like that, if you're going to be on the camera, are good enough to kind of get you through, because I know depending on what your situation is, like people aren't necessarily expecting you to be a professional virtual event speaker at the particular moment, so give yourself some grace with that in terms of like thinking through that and what you need to do. One of the things that we did too was actually reach out to some of our some of our partners who give events on the regular, many times on their own, and on behalf of Constant Contact as well. And just wanted to read one of the tips here that I think is a great one, and we'll probably talk more about as we get into the actual running of your event. But Ken Countess says here, I would recommend recording yourself and seeing how you look when you play it back, and you can pick up some tips from just seeing yourself on camera. I also recommend running polls and asking questions to keep people engaged during the session. I love that idea of recording and seeing and looking at it kind of from the attendees' viewpoint, so to speak, just so you can see what improvements you may be able to make before that. So thank you, Ken, for sending that out. Now, of course, part of what we're talking about here in terms of just running and preparing and getting ready, and Jenna, you touched on this a little bit earlier, but is the idea of you have to actually promote this event, right? You have to get people to it. And one of the things that we found when we're promoting our event is typically most people register primarily near the tail end of what we like to think of as like a 10 10-day window is when most people are going to register based on the date the event is going to happen. So there's just some things to think about there. That's what we found that works best in terms of when you actually start promoting that. And it's also a good idea to think about if you have little snippets of the content that you're going to have in that session or what it's going to be about. If you can share pieces of that, that's also a good way to promote the event. Any other tips from you guys in terms of actually thinking about promoting the event that you're running?
Yeah, one thing is as you start to get your feet under you and doing these presentations, don't forget to do your best to plan your next event before the current event and promote that event. You already have attendees that have shown an interest in your virtual event. You may want to plan a series, or at the bare minimum, promote that next event live in this event. And depending on the tool you're using, you might even be able to share a link so that they can go do that during the current presentation, or certainly have it in your follow-up. Because this audience has already shown an interest in what you have to say. And so you want to keep that going. Which
you'll see us do at the end of this event, and which we found actually works very well in terms of people coming and registering for an event ahead of you're even really promoting that event. So that's a great tip there. Steph, how about you?
I'd say don't forget about the basics. You've got email, and email is actually one of the best ways to promote a webinar or any type of event because you can reach people directly in their inbox. Create some social posts about it. You can do that in Constant Contact as well. And all while you're promoting your event, let people know what to expect. Do they need to do anything specific before the event, do a little piece of homework, or bring anything to the event? Again, we talked about the recording a little bit earlier, but people are going to be asking you questions. You can save a little bit of time just by letting people know that up front. And also, you might think about sending reminder emails to get people to register. And once they've actually registered, I would actually send them 1 or 2 emails so that they don't forget to actually attend, because again, people are busy. So for like this specific webinar, 24 hours before, you should have gotten a reminder email, and then also about an hour before. But those times could really vary depending on your audience. So think about that as well.
So we talked a little bit and touched on this thanks to Ken about practicing. We're talking about practicing with the technology and running through the event. So what do you need to think about here as we're kind of getting started? Matt, let's start with you.
I mean, I have to dovetail into what Ken said. I've been doing this now for Constant Contact 10 years. I've been doing webinars and virtual events for 13 years, and I still practice every single time I have a presentation, whether it's new, whether it's old. I definitely run through. If it's old, it's something I've done before, I'll run through it really quickly without doing all the setting up the cameras and doing the recording. But if it's new, I will record myself and I will run through things many times. And that's dependent on the complexity of your presentation. Is something you'll want to do. Not only will you want to record it to hear how you sound, to see how you look, to see the staging of your space, if that's going to be the kind of presentation you're making. But with the complexity, if you have slides, you want to practice the transitions of those slides. If you have animation, you want to practice that. If you have multiple presenters, you're going to want to think about how you're going to hand off that control to them and have them hand it back. And you certainly want to practice with them. So, I mean, it's an old saying, practice, practice, practice.
Yeah.
And I'll piggyback off what Matt said there too. I don't think you can ever practice enough, but record that practice of yourself and watch it yourself so that you can see how you're looking. But also, if you can, send it to a friend or a colleague because they can pick up on areas that maybe you haven't noticed. I know sometimes when I'm working on a project, I get so involved that I can't see things so objectively, whereas someone who's looking at it with a fresh set of eyes, they're going to pick up on something that maybe needs to be changed.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the other things I think is also important too is if you're thinking about when you're creating your outline, you're thinking about what is the information that you're gonna share. If you're scripting, for example, depending on how comfortable you are in this environment, you may want to think about making sure that if you are scripting something that you're reading that stuff out loud. Don't just write it down on paper, because a lot of times writing to write and writing to speak are a lot different. And when you actually start to say those words, that feels a little awkward. So definitely think about that. And then also determine if you're not a good reader of the script, it may be better just to make some notes for yourself so you're not feeling as if you're lulling people to sleep by reading, which could potentially happen. So definitely think about that as well as you're putting together your content and thinking about practicing that. How about Jenna? How about you?
Yeah, I love all of these tips. One thing I would say is even if you're doing all of these things, you're now still working with technology and it can go as unplanned. So you want to make sure that you have some sort of backup plan, and then you have a backup plan for your backup plan. And that could not even just be the technology. It could be, what if the day before you get a really sore throat and you're feeling sick, right? Is there somebody who can cover for you or send, your notes or your presentation to somebody else in case that they need to step on? I've been in a situation before where I've been on a webinar and all of a sudden my connection just went out on me. And actually, Matt, I think it was you. I think you were attending the webinar watching. And I think I had luckily sent you the link. And so he was able to pop in and kind of save the day until I got reconnected again. So, just think about those things. Not to, manifest that into your virtual event, into your reality, but just make sure that you have some backup plans and think through all of the scenarios that could go wrong so you have some sort of contingency for that.
Yeah, great point. Great point. So we've shared some good tips there. I want to kind of keep us moving so we have plenty of time to answer people's questions. So let's move to our second part here about kind of running the day you're actually running your event and how do you do that and keep people engaged. So what are some things to think about here, guys?
I always like to restart my computer before logging into a webinar or any type of event because it just gives that fresh connection. If there's updates happening in the background, I can make sure that's all set up. My internet connection is going to be reset. Also, if I'm demoing something, I want to clear my cache too. And I know that all four of us here, we do this all the time, but I can say, at least for myself, I definitely get nervous still after doing, I don't know how many webinars. So it happens to the best of us, and just take a minute or two before you get into the webinar or the event and just breathe. Also,
Go ahead.
Also, don't forget to grab a glass of water too, because you're going to need it.
Great points. You definitely want to have your water with you because the day of actually doing the event, you're going to find your mouth getting dry and that type of thing, just in the excitement of doing this. And I think you bring up a great point about being nervous too. I mean, we're in this webinar, people are seeing us and people are commenting to us, and I'm nervous that, oh my God, is this thing actually working? So like people actually hearing us right now and seeing us. And so it's definitely normal to have those feelings and just, I know, Matt, one of the things and one of the tips that you've given to me that's been helpful is thinking about that nervousness as just another form of excitement, and use that excitement to share with the people that are with you and get them excited about the things that you're talking about as well. But again, another reason to practice so you can get more comfortable with what's going on. Jenna, how about you? What do you think about the actual day of the event?
So I think that sometimes this can be a sensitive topic, but make sure that you're dressed appropriately and that you've thought through your wardrobe and how you're presenting yourself. I think if it's more of a casual environment, obviously you can dress a little bit more casually. If you're maybe on the other side of the spectrum where you're trying to, maybe you're some sort of consultant or you're trying to sell something, right? You might want to dress a little bit more professional. So think about, again, going back to Matt's point of thinking about your audience, thinking about the goal, what are you trying to portray? You also want to think about your environment and make sure that you're not wearing things that are going to make you blend in with your background. No loud patterns that are going to get, kind of weird on the screen there. I know some people, whether you wear makeup or not, they get some translucent powder just to make sure that they don't have shine on their face. So, again, if you're practicing and you're recording yourself, you can always look back and say, okay, how do I look and how am I presenting myself? If you plan on doing an event where you're not going to show yourself, I would still recommend getting dressed. The better you feel, the more your voice portrays that as well. Yeah. So, the presentation or how you're portraying yourself is not just visual, but it's audio as well. So think about the tone of your voice. Is it scratchy? Give yourself enough time to get coffee and to wake up. And to your point, Dave, excitement is is huge. Being enthusiastic about what you're talking about can be portrayed through that audio too. So think about those things.
Very good. How about you, Matt?
Well, I hate to be the bearer of awkward news, but with water and excitement goes something else, right? So make sure you plan your day. All right, I'll leave it at that. Make sure before your presentation starts, you think things through, because the last thing you want to do is have to stop the presentation. Show up early. That's a huge tip, and it's something that can be I'll say frustrating to me when I work with other folks that aren't used to doing virtual events. Show up early. A little behind the scenes here. We were all together talking 20 minutes before you showed up, before we opened the doors to you. That was primarily to make sure that all of our AV worked, all of the tech worked, everything was good, because that gives you some wiggle room to hurry up and restart something and fix it. What you don't want to do is what I see a lot of folks do, which is to get on the presentation tool, whether it's a webinar or a video meeting or conference, something of that nature, the minute right before you're supposed to go live, and find out, oh, my camera needs to be restarted, or I'm having problems with my browser. You don't want to do that, because then it just ends up making you not look professional, and to the point of being nervous. One strategy you can employ to make sure you're not nervous is be prepared. And so, to Jenna's point about a little bit earlier about planning for contingencies, be prepared also to show up on time and make sure all your equipment's running and everything like that is working.
Yeah, very good tips. Very good tips. Thank you, guys. So I've seen some questions come through here and talking about suggestions for kind of keeping people engaged during the session. Jenna, what are some of the things that people might want to think about here?
I love using multiple voice. So it's a technique that you have multiple people on presenting. So in this case, there's 4 of us here. We all know that when we're on a virtual event, that sometimes you can get distracted and your mind starts to wander a little bit. As soon as somebody hears a second voice or a different voice, it kind of brings them back, like, oh, that's different. And so it brings them back in. So that can be really helpful in keeping people focused. It also, I think, brings a little bit more credibility to what you're saying, right? So we know that people trust peer recommendations over advertisements or sales pitches. And so you can provide some thought leadership, but if you also have somebody else on the presentation with you or your virtual event with you, sharing their expertise, it lends a little bit more credibility to what you're saying too. So it can be more fun for people, more educational, and again, just keeps them really focused.
Yeah. Steph, I think you're actually really great at engaging people during the sessions that you run. What are some of the tips that you'd share?
Yeah, so definitely polls. We kind of did an idea of a poll earlier today where we just asked you to engage with us in the chat window and tell us about the type of events that you're going to be running. But, more specific polls, which in GoToWebinar, you can create polls, which is the tool that we use, by the way. Videos, they're going to be a great way to break up the presentation and bring in kind of that multiple voice as you're going through. Really great if you have a longer event, maybe something for your nonprofit fundraising or anything like that. And that could also mean if you're sharing or educating people about your product, maybe you have a video testimonial from one of your customers or something like that as well.
Interesting. So Matt, you've got an interesting tip here. Why don't you share that with us?
Sure. So to Jenna's point, we all need to be conscious of, with a virtual event, people can multitask. They have distractions, whether that's on their computer or on their phone, or now with our day and age, it might be other things in the house. So actually, I'll share with you two of my favorite tips. One is to pause. Sometimes I'll pause, and the lack of audio will make people snap attention to the screen, right? And so I use that as a technique. Another technique I'll use is to call attention to the slide. So instead of, to your point, Dave, about reading the longer text and having a little bit of text on the slide, sometimes I'll specifically say, now, if you look at the screen, you'll see what I'm talking about. And that will usually, I can see the attention being drawn back to my presentation.
Very cool, very cool. So one of the other things that I think is very important, and we've touched on it a little bit, but what are the suggestions that people have in terms of just managing distractions when you're actually running your event? I know one of the big things, of course, is making sure that you're turning off notifications on your phone, closing those unused apps, or closing your email down, particularly if you're presenting, of course, right? But just in any case, like little things like that can pull you right out of what you were talking about and what you were doing. What else? What else should people be thinking about when it comes to distractions?
I'd say if you can, have at least one person who's helping behind the scenes look at your chat window or your questions window for whatever tool you're using, because most likely you're going to have at least one of your attendees who's having some sort of tech issues, or they need a little bit more one-on-one assistance, and they can actually be responding in the background instead of you interrupting the entire event for everyone who is there and attending.
I understand that not everybody has a staff behind the scenes to do this, and I've done it. I know Jenna, Dave, all of us have probably done presentations completely by yourself where there is nobody behind the scenes. So, and even when you have people to help you, it's always a good idea to have a document. I usually use Notepad on my computer. I use a PC, and I have all the links that I'll need. I'll have some ready text, a wide variety of things that I'm going to use in the presentation, but also as backup. To be ready. That'll help me with distractions, because what you want to do is make it as fluid as possible. I don't want to be scrambling for this note and trying to grab that piece. And that's also really helpful if you're doing it on your own. Inevitably, you'll have people say, respond to your email, and your email may blow up and people are saying, I'm trying to get into the webinar, I can't get in a webinar. Yeah. So you may want to set up either an out of office for that situation, or at least have it, if you're going to have your email open, have that copy and paste ready to respond to those, so they're not as much of a distraction.
Jenna, you've got a big one for us that sometimes happens, which is inevitable to happen sometimes. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, so there are distractions that you can plan for, and then there are some distractions that you cannot plan for, such as responses in the chat window, right, from your actual attendees. So you never know what kind of questions or feedback you're going to get. Sometimes people have entered the chat room and they're trolling for trouble, and they're heckling you a little bit, and sometimes it's warranted and sometimes it's not. And so you really have to gauge, is this something that I pay attention to, or how do I distract myself from these negative comments if you don't feel like it's appropriate to address, right? Sometimes I do address them. I feel like it's easier to call out, what this person in the chat room is saying, that they're having a negative experience with my business or my company or my product. And in that case, I treat it like almost a rating and review site, right? Hey, I see your comment. That's not the experience we want to give. Let's take this offline. I'll email you afterwards so we can talk about this in more detail, right? So that way you can move on. And then there are some instances where maybe it's a bot, right? Somebody's in there and just typing things to distract you. I know we were talking about this yesterday. So it's, there are times when it's appropriate to boot somebody out of your virtual event if you're given the capabilities to. You just kind of have to gauge what's best for you, but try not to take it personally either, right? Just determine what's best for you to be able to move on with the content that you're trying to deliver.
Yeah. So we've got a lot of great questions coming in, and so I want to try to push us through this kind of how to follow up after event section here so we can get to those questions. But obviously it's always a good idea to get this feedback, and a lot of the things that we're talking about, sometimes it's warranted, sometimes it's not. I think it's really important to look for those things that can be constructive out of what you're hearing. We do look at the comments from these, and we try to, implement those things in the next time we do something, and we appreciate people taking the time to leave that feedback. But of course, you got to try not to take it personal, and use those things that can help you make things better in the future. What are some other things that people should think about when it comes to feedback? Matt?
Well, pay attention to what that feedback is, and if it's actionable. If somebody says, I had trouble hearing you, I had trouble with your screen, the camera looked dirty, or I really wish you had shared that website that you talked about. Use that for planning the next time, right? Okay, I'm gonna make sure I clean my lens. I'm gonna make sure that my audio sounds a little better. I might invest in a different kind of mic. I'll have URLs ready the next time. And so it's all a progression. Every time you do one of these, you'll learn a little bit more from that feedback.
And I'll try to keep my answer short just so we can get to these great questions, but pay attention to the survey that's going to pop up when you close out of the webinar today. We've got a question in there. It's a simple rating question from very dissatisfied to very satisfied on how you liked the webinar. Some other things you might do are ask people what they want to learn about in the future, and that can really help you to shape your event schedule going forward.
Yeah. The other thing to think about when it comes to follow-up, right, is that it's really a good opportunity to kind of recap the things that you've shared with people. And so when whether you're sending an email or you're just sharing things on social or just having a conversation with somebody that may have attended your event, it's a good opportunity to recap those things you said, reiterate the information that you shared, and it's good time to point them towards taking whatever that next step is. And I know this can be particularly interesting, specifically if you're trying to sell, Matt, right? Like, what are some tips you have there?
Well, my experience, a good part of my job is selling Constant Contact and presentations online, right? And it's actually pretty hard to sell in a presentation, and that's in a virtual presentation, because ideally, if you're doing a good job, they're paying attention to you and listening to you, and they're not distracted by doing ironically, the thing you're asking them to do. And so conversion from a virtual presentation is pretty hard. So you want to make sure that you grease the gears as much as possible, have links ready for chat windows and things like that, but also pay attention to the follow-up. Make sure you have follow-up already pre-written in an email, through social, ready to go. Certainly with the pertinent content you talked about, that might be slides, that definitely should be the recording, which is a great way to get people to actually open the email and do what you want them to do, and any other calls to action that are going to be important for you to get the conversion.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you guys would mention to think about, like kind of after an event, Jenna or Steph?
Yeah, I mean, I just be authentic. People love authenticity. So just try to have fun. Try not to get too nervous about it or uptight about it. Just be conversational and authentic about it. It's okay if you're reading from a script and you mess up, or if you cough or whatever. Just what would you do in person, right? What would you do if you're talking to somebody face to face? And just be yourself and try to have fun with it.
And I think my tip would be to think about the mileage that you can get from the event that you run. So maybe you can pull out little snippets or great pieces of learning that you can share with your audience who didn't register or attend. Maybe you want to put your video on YouTube so that it's searchable and your name's getting out there more.
Yeah. Great tips. So here's what I want to do before we move into the Q&A. I just want to recap a lot of the really great things that we've been hearing here today for everybody. So one of the interesting things here, obviously, of course, when it comes to planning your event, we talked about that first. If you can, at least plan a few weeks out so you have enough time to prep, plan, and practice, right? It's really important to know what it is that you're trying to do, so that you can figure out the content you'll need to support your virtual event, and always spend some time rehearsing with your content and using your technology, so you're going to be in the best shape day of. The other thing on the day of your event, we also talked about that, is make sure that you log in early so you have some time to check everything out. Try at least a half hour before, and don't forget to minimize those distractions that may come up. Close your email, turn off your chat, silence your phone, do all of that stuff, and really think about engaging your audience while you're running your event. Think about running those polls or asking questions to get people involved. And lastly, we talked about really thinking about what to do after the event, post-event, and asking for feedback so you can figure out how or what you can do to improve your events in the future. And also share follow-up information with your audience and point them to the next step. Obviously that may include sharing a recording, or maybe even asking for a sale if that's the type of webinar that you were running or event that you were having. And in most cases, just make sure anything that you are following up with feels timely and relevant after the fact. I'll mention again, don't forget, our Constant Contact customers out there, don't forget to check out the event management tool in your account. You're going to find that within the Create option, and that's included with our Constant Contact accounts, which are priced based on the number of contacts you have. And of course, if you do run an event through us or an event that requires a fee or something like that, there'll be some transaction fees that apply there for using that tool. I'm going to have Rachel, just before we get into the questions here, to ask her to share next week's webinar, a link to that with information for you on that. So next week, we're going to be talking with experts from Ecom Dash by Constant Contact, one of new products within our family, and folks from the Walmart Marketplace. And we're going to talk about how to start selling on the Walmart Marketplace. So hopefully you can join us for that. If we can share that link in the window, please. And of course, if you haven't already, please do check out the small business support kit that we've put together for people to help with different resources and tools and things like that for this particular time. If we could share a link to that as well. Again, thank you guys so much for being here with us, and thank you for sticking around for your questions. So let's get to it. Let's see, the first question that I have here that is interesting is, do we have any advice for the process of running a meeting with multiple breakout groups following a presentation? And a follow-on to that is, should participants direct questions to breakout moderators to screen and pass along, or direct them to the host? I don't know if I don't have any experience actually running breakout sessions within a webinar itself. Do you guys have any experience there or any suggestions?
I do. I mean, there are platforms out there that actually allow you to break people out into different breakout rooms and then bring them back into the same room where you can discuss what you talked about in your breakout session. So, I mean, again, that really kind of depends on your budget and how much you're willing to spend for that type of technology. But that's always an option. I think if you don't have a budget for that, just plan ahead, right? Make sure that you are clarifying instructions for them to break out when, where, how, and then follow up with that. Make sure that you remind, just like you would any other type of virtual event, make sure that you're reminding them right before they're supposed to be there, follow up with them afterwards. I think it's kind of the same process, just a little bit more detailed.
Yeah. Here's an interesting question from Kathy, and it's actually something my wife and I were chatting a little bit the other day, because my wife is an adjunct professor at one of the colleges out by us here, and the question is, ideas or strategies for assisting and recruiting instructors to be open to hosting an event. And so particularly when we find a lot of people moving to doing some things online, right? How do you get people excited about the possibility of actually participating in an event like this? And I'll just add before I throw it to you guys is, one of the things that we were talking about is that you actually have to think about it a little bit differently, right? That it's not just taking what you were doing in your day-to-day and moving it online. It's actually thinking about a little bit about what it is that you're doing and knowing that this is a different thing, right? And so you have to kind of modify what it is that you would typically do for that environment that you're in. And I think that's one thing that you can get people, when you start to get people to see that, you can get them excited about participating in the event. Any other suggestions for getting people kind of excited about actually doing one of these things?
Yeah, I was going to say, if you're looking to get people excited before the event happens, you've got to have something that's in it for them. What is the value that they're going to walk away from it? So don't make it just so much about you and what you're trying to accomplish. What are they going to get, out of attending your event? Really make that a priority as you're planning it as well.
So I have a question here from Gary. And Gary says, obviously, we're using GoToMeeting, GoToWebinar, but how about some advice on evaluating these types of tools? There are many out there, with Zoom especially making the news right now. So what should be the thought process? I think we touched on this a little bit, but maybe somebody want to recap, like what are what's kind of the steps that you want to think through when it comes to choosing the right platform for what you want to do?
I'll take that one. So we are purposefully trying to stay a bit product agnostic here. We don't want to particularly show favoritism for one tool or the other. You want to look at what are your requirements, what are your needs, and one big one I'd encourage you to, or actually two big ones I'd encourage you to do as you go online and you're investigating these solutions are, what is the capacity? So how many people can actually attend your event? I can tell you personally, and I'd be willing to bet everybody on this panel has run into a situation where you're getting nervous that you're actually getting towards the cap of registration in attendance, and that can be problematic. If you end up having a very popular event, a lot of people sign up, and not everybody can attend. That can be a big problem. The other you want to pay attention to is other time limitations. So some tools will limit you. They may give you something for free or for low cost, but they'll limit you to how much time you can have in that in that space. For some of your events, it'll be perfectly fine. For others, it may not. So think through, again, back to some of the points we made earlier. What's your audience? What's your goal? Who are you trying to reach? How do you want to reach them? What are your technology limits? And evaluate. You'll find a lot of great information online. Evaluate using those as your touchstones.
Yeah.
And I would say a lot of them are going to have those free trials as well. Take that to your advantage, because you can go out there, maybe pick 3 that look like they have the features that you want, and set up an event. Just thinking about how you would run it, what are the tools and features that you would need to use, and are they working how you expect them to in order for your event to be effective?
Yeah. Another thing just to think about that I'll throw out there too is a lot of times attend events as much as you can if you have that opportunity, and pay attention to what that experience was like for you, and was that something that you enjoyed, and if it was, then start to investigate, well, what was the platform that they used? That might be something that I want to check out. One of the other questions we have here from Tony is, should the event be recorded and available for replay? And I'll take that if you don't mind. So obviously we're recording the webinar today to share out afterwards, but I think the real answer is it depends, right? Because it depends on what the nature of your event and what the purpose and the goal for your event is, because it's quite okay to have something feel like an exclusive event and that you have to attend in order to actually, see the information and get the information. So it's perfectly acceptable. So it's not like a blanket statement to say, yes, you should record it. You may want to record it for yourself and, for prosperity's sake and learning how to improve, but that doesn't mean you actually have to share the event with other people. So just think about that there. What are some best practices? This is a question from Kathy, but what are some best practices for surveying the participants for feedback?
I was just going to say, keep it short and sweet. So our survey at the end of this has only 1 question. I've seen some companies use like 6 questions, and I think that is way too much if you ask me, because the more information that you're asking for people to fill out, that's just more time, and the less likely you are to actually get the feedback that you really need.
Great. So we have 2 questions here, one from Wendy, one from Donna, and related to really monetization. So one, how do you monetize an event, and how do you decide how much to charge for a virtual event? Any recommendations there?
Well, I'd certainly pay attention to the marketplace you're in. So whatever vertical, whatever industry you're in, see what competitors are doing, see what the market will take. Also take a look at, if you've done live events, what's the appetite for live events? Don't discount, and I think that the heart of this question is a lot of people devalue virtual events because, technically there's no skin in the game. There's no big infrastructure like a brick and mortar. You don't have podiums and microphones and overhead. And so I think there's a general reluctance for people to charge for a virtual event because it might appear to be value, the value won't be there. I'd encourage you to think that through, right? It all depends on the education, the information, the value you're providing to people. And if there's value there and you know that there's value there, don't be afraid to charge for it. You can also test your audience's appetite too. So maybe you start at, and I'm just throwing this number out there, but maybe you start at $10 per attendee. And if that's going badly, if you think that that's hurting your registration, you can alter it in a different event. But don't be afraid to put value to your presentation.
I think also to think about what is your business? Are you using your virtual event as a means to generate leads? You might want to do a short, free 30-minute session, and then if they want a little bit more consultation, then that's the charge later on, right? But if you're, say, a yoga studio or maybe an arts and crafts center, and they're taking a workshop from you, well, or a class, right? Then yeah, I mean that's the means to make money for your business. So charge them, what you would charge them if they were going to take a class from you, right? I mean that's your knowledge that you would be sharing and having them pay for anyways. So I think it depends on what your business is and what you're trying to accomplish with that.
Yeah. Here's a question from Yahara, and who says, something I've noticed with our organization is that a ton of people register for an event, but when it comes time to join, only roughly a quarter of the people actually attend. Do you have any recommendations for this? I'll just add that I think one, that's normal, right? You're not going to have everybody attend. But I think it also begs the question, are you letting people know that you're recording the event and that they'll receive that recording afterwards? Because I know even on our side, I mean, we typically have about a third to 40% maybe of the people actually like attend that register for the event, but we do call out the fact that if you can't attend the time of, please do it, register anyway, because we're going to send you the recording. And so I'll just add that it's normal for that to happen. Any other suggestions from folks in terms of actually getting people to attend?
Yeah, this doesn't necessarily help you get people to attend that one, but, and I want to just really nail what Dave just said, because I think you're gonna lose 30 to 40%. I mean, it's almost universal that won't attend. And that's because, one, people may have gotten busy. Two, maybe you've taught them, or they've just been taught through virtual events that it's going to be recorded. But another tip you can make, if you have the bandwidth, the literal time bandwidth to do it, is offer multiple versions of your presentation to better fit people's time. So maybe you have one in the morning and the afternoon, maybe different days of the week, to better fit into the lifestyles and needs of people. You can see higher registration and attendance by offering multiple choice.
And definitely test into it too, because you'll see if this is your first event, maybe try the second one at a different time of day or something else, and see if that has more of an impact.
Question here from Steve. What kind of mics are you guys using? Steve, I'm actually going to have to take off my headset here for a second to look, but it's a USB mic. Logitech. So a Logitech USB mic is what I'm using. I think probably Steph and I are using something similar. Am I correct, Steph?
Mine is also a Logitech, but it looks a little bit different, so I'm not sure on the exact model of it. But we've been using these for all of our webinars for quite a while, so definitely pretty good quality. And it's easy because this one has a nice mute button right here. So if I need to cough or sneeze or just make sure I'm not moving around while I'm sitting here listening to these guys chat.
I see Matt is ready to show us his fanciness over there.
Well, as soon as this question came up, I was like, oh, they're going to say something about fancy. This is a Blue Snowball USB microphone. I have this elaborate rig because I do podcasting, and your podcast, that is, your voice is everything, so it needs to sound really good. I mean, while this looks elaborate, all in, and the company Conseconic didn't buy this, I own all of this, all in maybe $80. I mean, it looks really expensive, but the rig is purposeful. So I have a very good mic, and it's isolated. So if I make a bump on my table or something, it's isolated so that bump won't get transmitted through. And then I have a pop guard to make sure that my voice sounds as good as possible. Back to the point of, if I'm going to sell and all I have is my voice, I want my voice to sound as professional as if I was standing in front of you in person. I want to have that same level of professionalism carried through my voice.
Yeah.
And back to a couple points we made when it comes to a mic, a couple of points had been made about making sure you bring your enthusiasm and you bring your presentation to life through your voice and your attitude. Well, a good mic will help you do that.
Yeah. I have the same one as Matt. He actually recommended that I get it. It's just a different color, but I don't have all the stuff in front of it.
Well, I'm a nerd. I mean,
but these are great. I think this microphone it was like $20-$30.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great mic.
More affordable, so.
Well, there you go, Steve. I hope that was helpful. Let's see. So we have about 2 minutes left here and a bunch of questions. So I'm just going to try to see if we can fly through some of these. So let's see. Our event is a fundraiser. This is a question from Michelle. Any advice on the best way to push out an interactive donation form link to our donor page at a specific moment in the event without navigating them away from the event? So I'm going to say that feels like that's a difficult situation. If you're including a link that obviously they're going to need to navigate away right from the page. The other thing I could think of is maybe investigating ways to donate through text. So that way, if people are on an event, then you can share a number to donate, text this number to blah, blah, blah. Then they can just use their phone and they're actually not going to leave your event, right? But if you're actually providing a link, I can't really think of any way that wouldn't take them away at least to that landing page for them to make that donation. So that might be something there that you want to think about.
You could make sure that in the follow-up communications too, that rather than sharing it in the chat window, you could just say, listen, everything that we're talking about today, we're going to include links there. So they'll still get that information, but they're getting it later.
Yeah.
And I would say that also depends on the platform you're using too, because I've seen some that have like this dashboard and you've got your video and your slides there. Some of them are a little bit more complicated, so make sure it's going to not be confusing to your audience at all, but you could potentially have a module in there that has your donate information in there.
Yeah. Here's an interesting one. How do you recreate, this is a question from John, how do you recreate the social aspect of fundraising, of a fundraising event online?
Well, you've seen a little bit of that today. I mean, and I'm going to say a very little bit, but you saw us ask polls and get people involved. You know, you could certainly do a lot more of that. It depends on the solution you're using. I mean, some you can actually have everybody see all the chats and going back and forth. I know it hadn't been brought up today, but I was expecting somebody to bring up Facebook Live. There's positives and negatives to that experience, but one of the positives is it's literally an event that people can interact with through chat.
You might want to consider dedicating some time to, and I know some people feel a certain way about this, but games or activities or themes, right? I've heard people doing, you know, okay, everybody dress mismatched for this meeting, right? Or I know a fellow trainer who he took time to put together a Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego game. So he dedicated 15 minutes of the meeting to just doing something more social and fun rather than just a training. So, you know, if you don't feel like it's too tacky, or if you feel like it's appropriate for your audience and you want to create more of that social aspect, those are always great ways and activities to do.
Yeah. So I notice we're actually at the top of the hour here, and I just again want to thank everybody for joining us today. Thank you to both Stephanie, Jenna, and Matt, or all of you, for sharing your expertise here today. I hope you guys really found that beneficial and helpful as you think about planning your next event. We do have a number of other questions here that you'll be receiving a follow-up email, and in our community, we try to get some answers to more of these questions, so be sure to check that out along with the recording that you'll receive via email. Thank you again for spending some time with us here today. We really appreciate your attention. And on your way out, you'll notice an ask for letting us know what you thought about the session here today, and you can provide any comments there. Please do that because we do look at all of them and we take them seriously, and it does help us improve in the future. So again, thank you, all of you, for joining me here today, and thank you for being here with us. I hope you have a great next event, and if you have any other questions, be sure to let us know. Bye-bye.
Bye.